Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about beauty. And why? Well, because as a society, as a culture, we are starved of beauty. And not only that, but the powers that be around us not only starve us of beauty, but they try to convince us that ugly things are beautiful as well. And I'm going to go deep into the definition of what beauty is, where it comes from, why we perceive it as such, because our ancestors, certainly the ancients and the medievals, understood beauty much better than we do. Why? Because they had a steady diet of beauty. But as you get closer and closer to the now, you see society lacking beauty more and more. And to extend the food analogy of the entire thing, not only are we starved of beauty, but we are so unfamiliar with what beauty is that when we see it, we don't even understand whether or not it is edible. And certainly do not understand the fact that not only is it edible, but it is one of those parts of our diet which gives us the essential nutrients to survive. And I have noticed this with my interactions with everyone here as my audience and on other platforms where I have an audience. One of the things that I now tweet on Twitter, X, daily, well, usually during the weekday, is a post of "Make comic women beautiful again." And that usually gets more traction than anything else I put out on my Twitter during the entire day. Link for my Twitter in the description, by the way. And why? Well, again, because people are starved for beauty. People crave beauty. It is something which should be part of our normal everyday diet, and it simply is not. And I also try to do that with the things I create as well. One of the things that I do within my graphic novels is to ensure that we get back to beautiful women and the male equivalent thereof, which is handsome men. For my women, I usually like to go back to a start of 1930s starlets. Give an image like that to my artists and say, begin from here and create a character. Because many of those women, at the very least, were presented not just as beautiful, but graceful as well. And that is a powerful 1-2 punch. And of course, as I always say, my books are centered around the idea of the virtuous hero. And indeed, beauty has a significant connection to that virtuous hero. And I'll try to get to that at the end of this video as well. And so these are, of course, the themes that I think any good writer should explore, especially writers who deal with things like superheroes, which is what I do, and for science fiction and fantasy, which again, I have a fantasy graphic novel. These are ideas which should be brought to the forefront. The true, the good, the beautiful, the virtuous hero, and how all of those things and each of them individually inspire us to be better men and women ourselves. That, by the way, is the core of what I think about when I write and when I produce my graphic novels. Links for those graphic novels, by the way, are in the description. And you're looking at some of the beautiful art for those graphic novels in the background. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, I would ask you to click on one of those links and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you. But as I said, instead of dancing around the topic and giving you examples of beauty and why I think they're examples of beauty, I think that while that has its place, we need to get back to the fundamentals of understanding exactly what beauty is, because giving examples doesn't do a whole lot of good if we are so starved for understanding about beauty and witnessing to beauty that we can't put our finger on why things are beautiful. And as I said, I'm going to get deep into really the philosophical understanding of what beauty is, but hopefully I will counter that dryness of speaking in that way with images of beautiful women in the background. That's what I'll give you in the background to give you a visual feast of beautiful comic women. I suppose I might throw some beautiful pulp women in there as well. And also, just a quick note on that, there have been people in the comments saying over my last number of videos that I'm not giving any pop culture references to the things I'm talking about. Well, I would say, yes, I am. It's in the visuals that I present to you. I don't sync them up 100% with what I'm saying at the moment, but that's the point of why I usually loop the video with the images that I use, because they are my examples of pop culture understanding, certainly within the last 50 years or so, of exactly what I am talking about. And that is definitely the case today with my presentation of beautiful women when I'm talking about beauty, and to some extent, the ugliness that we see within pop culture and what is presented to us as normal in pop culture right now. So let's not waste any more time. I will give you the very heavy statement, which I find to be the most condensed, briefest description of understanding beauty as it connects to all the things that I have been talking about. And it is from Thomas Aquinas. And I will go over really a breakdown of understanding exactly all of these little bits after I finish giving you the quote. It says, "Beauty and goodness in a thing are identical fundamentally, for they are based upon the same thing, namely the form. And consequently, goodness is praised as beauty, but they differ logically. For goodness properly relates to the appetite, goodness being what all things desire. And, therefore, it has the aspect of an end, that is, the appetite being a kind of movement towards a thing. On the other hand, beauty relates to the cognitive faculty, for beautiful things are those which please when seen. Hence, beauty consists in due proportion. For the senses delight in things duly proportioned, as in what is after their own kind, because every sense is a sort of reason, just as is every cognitive faculty. Now, since knowledge is by assimilation, and similarity relates to form, beauty properly belongs to the nature of a formal cause." All right, so this gives us a very good connection to understanding exactly what beauty is and how it works. But before we get to what it is, let's look at one of the examples of what it is not. And this is something I've been talking about, certainly on my live streams, when I discuss sequential art and why there is a line that I think you should not cross. And that line being the fact that you should present as best you can beauty in all of its splendor. But there are, and has certainly been in the past, many comic creators who visually cross a line wherein they move from beauty to, I can think of no other word really to give to it except titillation. And as far as I'm concerned, if you want that kind of book, if you want a book that concentrates on skin, go buy a book like that. Don't try to mix the two, because you're muddying up subjects that don't naturally belong together. And why don't they naturally belong together? Why? Because, as it says here, goodness is part of the appetite, whereas beauty relates to the cognitive faculty. What does that mean? Well, it means that we pursue things that are good. That's what he means when he talks about appetite, because appetite is the pursuing of things. And we pursue things that we deem to be good because we think we will be fulfilled when we achieve that good thing. And no doubt, there is a sense of fulfillment when we do pursue a desire for the opposite sex. And what is that fulfillment? Well, that fulfillment is children. That fulfillment is procreation. I do believe that the entire reason for this appetite is skewed when you present it in, as we usually see, a two-dimensional format, because you're stirring up a desire that can't actually be fulfilled because it's not a person. What is that line from Virgil? It goes something like, "How much better would it be to try and banish that love from your heart than to inflame useless passions even more?" Again, for my part, I believe that the presentation of beauty itself, rather than titillation, is much more useful towards fulfilling the useful and natural desire that arises between men and women. Why? Because beauty is part of the cognitive faculty. Beauty is presented to you and it is pleasing and appealing, and you say, I want a steady diet of this. I want this as part of my life. And then instead of inflaming useless passions, you sit down and say to yourself, well, how do I get that? How do I find a person that will be there in my life for the rest of my life that can fulfill that need and the other needs that are connected to it? But anyways, that's a part of my own discussion around the whole topic and why I find there should be a line to which you can explore beauty in a visual medium. But to get back to the definition, it's saying that, yes, beauty and goodness are essentially the same thing. Each of them are dependent upon the form of what it is, and that form for each is the same. Now, for anybody who doesn't know what the idea of forms are, well, ideas and forms are actually the same thing. It harkens back to the Platonic idea that everything has a form. Every chair that's a chair participates in the form of chair. It's an idealized, or you might say spiritual example par excellence of what the thing is. In Christian terms, I've heard it described as it is the perfected thing as it exists as a thought within the mind of God. But if you want something that's less poetic to try and describe it, it's the idea that every circle is a circle because it participates in the definition of what circle is, because there is a form of a circle which every circle must be in order to be a circle. Same with the other shapes. Every rectangle is a rectangle only so far as it reflects that perfect idea of a rectangle. Every triangle is a triangle insofar as it reflects that perfect idea of a triangle. It must meet all the qualifications of the definition of what a triangle is according to that idea, which again, idea can equal form when you discuss it within language. And so the form of beauty is exactly the form of goodness. It is simply that we participate in the interaction with beauty and goodness in two different ways. Goodness we interact with through our appetite, through our movement towards such a thing, whereas beauty we interact with through our cognitive faculties. And we interact with it in that way as follows, as he says, hence beauty consists in due proportion, for the senses delight in things duly proportioned. How do we know that they're duly proportioned? Well, as he says, as in what is after its own kind. And how does that work? Well, again, it goes back to the idea of form. Let's look at it in terms of a human being. How do we see human beings as beautiful? Well, it is dependent upon the form, that idealization of what a perfect human being is. Now, I want to note here something very interesting is that he talks about proportionality as being a part of beauty. Not very specific proportions, but proportionality. There's a difference. So if we were to say, take every human being and perfect them so that they were beautiful, would they all look the same? Well, no, they wouldn't. It's not every human being has to have very specific proportions. It's that those proportions which you have need to be proportional to each other. And that's why I talked about shapes in a little bit of detail just a minute ago. Why? Because yes, a circle is a circle and the form of a circle is not going to change. It's just usually bigger or smaller, but it's always the same. Same with a rectangle. But you look at a triangle can have many, many different shapes and still participate in the form of a triangle. And so it is with the beauty of a human being. Many, many different shapes of the human being can be the pinnacle of the perfection, that is to say, the beauty of that human form. And that's why it may be a little bit more complicated, but is certainly spectacular to view when we try to understand what a thing is when it is beautiful, because we relate it back to the form of perfection of the thing. This is also part and parcel of why it is part of the cognitive faculty, because as it says, knowledge is by assimilation. We assimilate things. That's how we grow in knowledge. But how do we do that? Well, we see how a thing that we're looking at is similar to the form of the thing. And the more and more similar a thing is to its form, the more and more we understand that it has proportionality, the more and more we appreciate that it is a beautiful thing. It is a beautiful, as I'm talking about, human being. And again, how do we know what that perfect form is? Well, that perfect form, again, is connected to goodness, is connected to the fact that we as human beings start off as always striving to be complete, always striving to be fulfilled. As I usually speak about it in terms of the pursuit of happiness, that man seeks life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Why life and liberty? Because life and liberty are needed in order to pursue happiness. Happiness that we pursue is that fulfillment. It is the appetite tending us towards what is good, towards a position where we are indeed fulfilled. And not just fulfilled in the sense of the physical, but total and complete fulfillment. That is, as it says within the quote that I gave, why goodness is what all things desire. It is the complete perfection of the form of who we are as human beings, of what we are by nature, and that's why we pursue it. And that is the, again, ideal, the idea, the form which we compare everything to see whether or not it is duly proportioned, to see whether or not it is beautiful. It is, as I speak about many, many times, the fulfillment of our human nature, which is exactly why and where we get to the point of why the culture around us is trying to starve us of beauty. Why? Because it's based upon socialist ideas that say there is a utopia in the future and we can build it. But the thing that most people don't quite understand about this idea of utopia in the future is that these ideas that are presented to us are not ideas where they say we can create a utopia in the future by crafting that utopia around what human beings are. No, no, no. Those ideas are built upon the fact that in order to build a utopia in the future, we have to whittle mankind down into a shape that will fit into that utopia. As I always say, utopia is a round hole in the socialist mentality, and human beings are square pegs. Therefore, in order to get a utopia, they must whittle that square peg down into a round peg in order for it to fit into the whole of utopia, in order for their utopia to take place. Problem is, it is our nature to be square pegs. They don't believe that. They don't believe in a fixed human nature. They don't believe in the form of a human being. Because if they did, then they would understand that we're not built for utopia. Not in this life, anyway. And so every socialist idea, it doesn't matter where it comes from, harkens back to a utopian ideal, a utopia that they want to build in the future, and that is predicated upon changing mankind and his nature to fit into that utopia, which necessitates the destruction in your mind of the idea of a perfect form of humanity from which we all proceed, from which we all owe the essence of our existence, from which we can never deviate because it is a thing which is perfect. It is a thing, therefore, unchangeable. That is the whole contrast between ancient and medieval thought and modern thought. Most of modern thought, anyways. Ancient, medieval, and a section of modern thought all understand that we have a fixed human nature. The more modernist way of thinking about things, which is certainly the socialist way of thinking about things, is that there is no fixed human nature, and you can shape and bend and pound humanity into whatever form you wish it to be. And usually that's the form that the people in control find the most useful. But the point is, the reason, again, we are starved for beauty right now is because since these people who are in control of our political systems no longer believe, due to their political ideology of socialism, in the idea of a fixed human form, of a fixed human nature, there is no standard of that form, of that nature, within which we can use our cognitive faculties to compare what we see with what is the perfection of the thing, the form of the thing. And if we cannot perceive it as such, then we cannot understand what is beautiful. And indeed, the flip side of the entire thing is true as well. They present us with ugliness and want us to acclimatize ourselves to it as if it were normal. Why? So they can destroy our mind's ability to understand what is beautiful, to destroy our mind's ability to take what we see in front of us and compare it to the perfect form of the thing, the perfect fulfillment of the nature of mankind, so that in their minds, we aesthetically understand that there is no such thing as a fixed human nature. Which I'll need to point out that if the idea, and again, the heaviest minds in humanity all agree on this, if the idea of a fixed human nature is indeed true, then what these people are doing is in essence starving us of fulfillment when it starves us of beauty. To compare things, especially human beings, to the perfected and unchangeable form of the thing, which again also leads to the fact that is why the great irony of socialist thinking is to point people towards a utopia in the future where they promise them fulfillment, which, if the people follow, will lead them farther and farther away from fulfillment, which again, at the same time, means farther and farther away from beauty. And if we understand that beauty and goodness are essentially the same thing, it leads us farther and farther away from goodness, which is where the entire subject matter of the virtuous hero comes into the entire thing. Because goodness is broken down into the useful, the pleasant, and the virtuous. The useful being something that is an intermediate step that allows us to get closer and closer to fulfillment. The pleasant being our achievement of some kind of fulfillment and a sort of rest within that thing which we have now grasped. But the virtuous is an appetite that tends towards a thing for its own sake. We don't pursue fulfillment for something else. We pursue fulfillment for fulfillment itself. And it is virtue that allows us to pursue a thing for its own sake. Or to put it in other terms, virtues are those things which allow us to pursue the perfection of a thing which is the end goal of fulfillment. So why, and to some extent how, do we present something truly beautiful? Well, we present something beautiful because it allows us to understand why it is we are tended towards, why it is our appetite moves us towards what is good. We see in our mind's eye the perfection of the thing within the due proportions of what we are looking at in front of us. Or to put it in simple terms, we look at a thing and say, wow, that is perfection. That is beautiful. And in terms of what we've been discussing over the last couple of minutes, number one, that is useful insofar as it tends us again towards, in an understanding way, steps that will get us closer and closer to our end of fulfillment, such as saying, I want that beauty in my life. Go find yourself a beautiful woman, a beautiful man. Make that beauty part of your life with companionship and procreation and all that comes along with it. Number two, that is pleasant because the senses delight in it. And number three, that is virtuous because it allows us to understand that we wish indeed to grasp the perfection of the thing. And not only that, but in grasping it, we will be fulfilled. And so it is no wonder that as the idea of something like superhero comic books grew and became a thing unto itself, you saw heroism and beauty presented side by side. Because goodness can be broken down into its strongest component part, which is virtue, and virtue, when lived out, leads to a heroic individual. But in that pursuit of goodness itself, we are also pursuing what is beautiful insofar as we understand more and more why a thing is good and beautiful. And in a medium like comic books, where you present your story through words and pictures, while the heavy lifting of presenting the heroic is done by the words, the heavy lifting of presenting the beautiful is done through the visual. And so to scar one is to scar both. To ignore one is to ignore both. To get rid of one is to get rid of both. And our society is at a tipping point right now. We are fed up with the ugly, and we are definitely fed up with people trying to tell us that what is ugly is beautiful. We are fed up with people trying to tell us that what is a vice is actually a virtue. And we are fed up with stories which are supposed to inspire us to something greater, simply drag us down into the muck and mire of being incomplete, of being unfulfilled. And that is indeed exactly why the future of storytelling is in the hands of those who pursue and understand the true, the good, and the beautiful. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And I'm sure there'll probably be a bunch of comments on the fact that I simply have not done this subject justice. And again, just a quick reminder that if you want a more story-based explanation of all of these ideas that I like to think about and talk about, then there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels, 2 superhero graphic novels, 1 fantasy graphic novel. You're looking at some of the beautiful art for them in the background right now. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and order yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.
An age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world will burn.